Darling, we've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind, where is the power?
Welcome to Ideas Don't Bleed, a comics podcast presented by Ashcan Press and featuring Matthew Rosenberg and the Supple Boiz, Ethan S. Parker, and Griffin Sheridan. This is part 2 of our Uncanny X-Men Disassembled retrospective with Kelly Thompson and Ed Brisson. We hope you enjoy.
I want to go back to the summit more. You know, I think the summit was really fun and interesting, and having us all in the office. The thing I remember most was everyone had some ideas, but we definitely thought that they had an idea of what they wanted.
Yeah.
And so we came in kind of like, well, what's it going to be? And they kind of looked at us like, well, what is it going to be?
Yeah.
And we all had little pieces. And I remember that clearly. And then I remember at a certain point, I think I said to you, Kelly, I was like, well, I have this, I like either at lunch or like on a sidebar, I was like, well, I had this thing I was going to do in Astonishing X-Men, but they just canceled Astonishing X-Men and it's Legion versus X-Man.
Yeah.
And you were like, say it in the room.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I remember you referred to it as grandchildren of the atom in the room.
Yeah, grandchildren of the atom, because it's the two most prominent X-Men, or two of the most prominent X-Men's kids. And the idea that I had was just like, the idea that I wanted to do in Astonishing, and I don't think we did it because I don't think it really made sense, but was the idea that like the world has always told the mutants that they're scary and whatever. What happens when the mutants have to face the fact that like some of them are terrifying, that like these things are speeding up exponentially, and they are like Colossus is not a threat to people walking down the street, but like Legion is a threat to people walking down the street. Like X-Man has the power to be a global threat. And what does it mean for them when like their own children are sort of scaring them? It's not a very pro mutant idea in some ways. It's a very like dark idea of like, well, the X-Men push normal people past, push humans past their comfort level. What happens when the next generation of mutants pushes the X-Men past their comfort level of what people can do? And it's a very dark idea. And I think we backed away from some of the darkness on it in the book. And I think we were right to. But yeah, that was a thing I threw out in the room, and they and ends up being a big part of the book. But I do remember fondly all of us sort of sitting down and being like, well, what are they going to tell us? And then them being like, staring back at us.
Yeah. They maybe should have just been a little more clear. Maybe we could have come with even more ideas, although Matt had enough to keep us going from all your astonishing work and everything. But I will say that idea of X-Men and Legion being the literal children of the X-Men, that's definitely in there. Like, we got it in there, but to me, that's such a great idea. It's sort of deserving of its own, it's really deserving of its own story, and maybe it's not, maybe it can't ever be an X-Men story because it would be, not enough punching and blowing things up because it's a little more subtle of an idea. But I think that it's in there, but it deserved a lot more air than it got,
Well, thanks.
As an idea. But I feel that way, not to make your idea seem less special, Matt, but I feel that way about a lot of the things. The same way I said the stuff with the Legion giving his powers, making Multiple Man into his own personal army, Multiple Man army, because he's offloading his other powers into Multiple Man's is incredible. And we set it up and we do a lot of cool shit with it, but then we sort of drive by the reveal of that was what was happening. So again, it's another idea that's like really good and that really works when you reread it even, but we did sort of still not give it enough air, which is something that happens in an event book, I think.
Yeah, I think when you make something big, there's a really difficult balance between being like, this is 2 years of story. And like, there's a way, if you don't want it to just be punching, there's a chance that it's like, well, this is a lot of story to cram into the issues, and that will feel big in some ways. And I feel like X-Men Disassembled does feel big, but I also feel like, yes, like what would it look like if they just gave us the book for 2 years? Like what would, and each of these things was its own arc and its own like ongoing mystery. And I think that's how we sort of approached it, was like, let's put a lot of story in here and a lot of mystery, and then you just have to get to the end in a month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah.
The other thing that I loved at the summit, that we've never talked about publicly, was that in the middle of one of the days of the summit, there was a bomb threat in the Marvel offices.
Yeah.
Not to the Marvel offices, but to the building. That they were in. There was a what the NYPD or whoever legal, whatever authority figures those things go to, considered it a credible enough threat that the building was evacuated while we were in mid-summit. And Ed and Kelly had flights to catch, and so we grabbed all our stuff, laptops and notebooks, and went to a bar and did 7 hours in the back of a bar on this book.
7 hours? I can't believe I spent 7 hours in that chair. That's amazing.
I mean, it was a long time, because we went in the middle of the day and we ate dinner there, and we were there late.
Yeah,
it was great.
It's wild. Okay.
Building didn't blow up though.
Yeah, and there were many jokes about, like, the fans had gotten wind of what we were doing.
Yeah, they don't want us to kill. Yeah, to kill whoever we killed. We didn't kill anyone in this book. Oh no, that's not true. I killed Sugar Man.
Now let's talk about that. That's my biggest problem with the whole book, is that I think issue 1...
I killed Sugar Man?
No. Issue 1 is great. and it was great, and it was done. And then they came in and they wanted us to double it in size.
Yeah.
And so they wanted us to just each do a 10-page backup story. And I was like religiously against it. I don't think, despite our best efforts, it reads that well in the first issue. Like later, like if you stay with the book, like in issue 6, you're like, oh, those were those things they were setting up in issue 1. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I think we must have been on issue 4, 5, or 6 when they had us write those. So that came really late.
Yeah, it's really late.
When they asked us to do it. So it was not even a thing where we could tease things and pay it off until much later.
Yeah.
It's still a weird thing.
I could be misremembering, but is it possible? This definitely happened to me, and I don't know if it happened on this book or a different book, but one of us saw the solicits and saw that the page count was high, and we were like, what else is in this issue? And they were like, oh, you need to add more stories. Is that is that this, or did that happen to me on a different book?
No, I think this one, they came to us and told us that we had to write extra content. I think we pushed back.
I mean,
this is like,
I threw a full fit.
But like, this is maybe stuff we shouldn't be talking about publicly, but I'll say anyways. I think we pushed back, and the pushback on the other end was that they would just have other writers write it if we didn't want it, unless I'm misremembering that.
But I think,
that sounds right.
I mean, I don't think it was said as a threat in my memory. It was
we
understand if you guys are too busy, we could just get some people, and we were like, no, we hate that even more. Like,
I would say now that we've gotten out of our system, I would like to talk about some of the things that I really like about the book. For me, one, I think there's a lot, like, we've talked a lot about our headaches on it and like the stress of it. And I think what you're hearing a lot is like the stress of a weekly book. It's really fucking hard. But I think, and there is something inelegant about splitting. I think any comic artist would tell you this too. Splitting a series up between artists is always difficult. Like, you want an artist to own the story even more than you want us to be cohesive. Like, nice cohesive art throughout is what you want. But I think that the artists who worked on the book were all amazing, and we haven't really given them enough credit because we've been complaining a little bit. But like, Mahmoud Asrar was great, RB Silva was great, Yildre Sinar, Perry Perez, and then the backups are Mark Bagley, a legend, and I think mine was Mirko Kolak. And I think all those guys came through and did a job where the book, it's not one artist and no one would look at it and think it was one artist, but like, they all really gave it their all. And I think that's really under stressful conditions. And so I was always really pleased when the art came back. I was always like, man, like, especially like RB Silva, I was just like so in love with everything RB did on the book.
He was really impressing us for sure.
Agreed. And there was a lot of, I do remember there was a lot of them having to try and match stuff up with stuff that hadn't been drawn yet.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of passing back and forth between artists having to sort of, figure out, looks for characters or especially I remember those last two issues because we were like, let's just bring in every X-Men. And I can't remember who drew the last issue, but had to like, sort of try and figure out what all the X-Men were going to look like that hadn't been drawn yet.
Yeah. And there were also things like all of a sudden Magneto, Angel, Blob and Omega Red are crazy horsemen of transcendence or whatever they were called, right? And it's like if you were drawing them and then all of a sudden they have these crazy look, like it was a lot to ask, and those guys did an amazing job.
Yeah. And I don't know, I mean, our editors also like Darren Chan and Jordan White were juggling our stuff and the coming Hickman stuff, and that's a lot to ask. And I don't know if they were shielding us from angry emails from artists or if the artists were just super amenable and really good sports. But I always felt like, man, we complain a lot in the emails and the artists are just workhorsing this stuff so good. And I was always like, man, we need to we need to take a page from their books. But it's possible that we just weren't CC'd on emails and they were miserable too, and poor Darren and Jordan just got beat up in every email they got. But so that's something that I remember fondly. What do you guys think of fondly in the books? Yeah,
so like just looking at the first, like I've been sort of flipping through the issues. I do like like I talked about it a couple times throughout this podcast. I did think that we did a lot of fun stuff with the younger characters in trying to elevate them some. This is dumb as shit, but I was like really excited to get the Mutant Liberation Front in there. They're like just a stupid favorite of mine from the 90s, from that era of stuff. And I think we gave them like pretty cool, updates to their look. I was really happy with how that sort of came in and how that stuff sort of played a role going forward. I thought it was, I thought there was a lot of fun stuff in there. So that's the thing that I was just really happy with how all that sort of stuff came together.
I feel mixed about the kids stuff. I think the plot line is super worthy, and I think Ed was really right to push for it. I think it's a big deal for those kids that often look sort of ignored. Plot-wise, it's like, we created them while we needed them, and now we don't need them, so let's never see them again, and it's weird. And so I'm glad we did it, but, I tend to be very averse at this point, ironic considering what I've been doing on my Substack lately, but I don't want the heroes fighting each other a lot and bickering a lot. I have a low tolerance for that, and so in my reread, I think that's the part of the kids' plotline that I didn't love. But I do like that we brought it up and that we have them pushing against it and all that stuff that Ed really fought for. I think all of that stuff really works. I'd love to see another story, much like Matt talking about the children of the X-Men stuff. I think that's a plot I'd like to see as the main plot in another book. You know what I mean? Like the evolution of those kids. I just think, again, it just gets a little bit lost in the shuffle. I think that's why I keep talking about the first 4 issues, because that's what I like. I think they're really under control there. The ideas haven't gotten so big yet. It's still allowing itself, even though there's like crazy world stuff and you can feel that it's a larger plot. It's a mystery and it feels right how these characters are addressing it, but it just gets too big for its britches at one point for me. But yeah, I think a lot of the ideas in there are cool. Kitty disappearing was really good. I thought Apocalypse was a great reveal, although Matt's right, the Krakoa of it all sort of makes it feel less interesting now. And I'm with Matt about the artists. Like, they did an incredible job under very tough conditions.
I think the thing, I'm sort of flipping through the nice hardcover on sale now at your local comic book store. I'm flipping through it, and I remember now, like, how happy I was when the X-Man design came in. And we were like, because we were like, he's messianic. He's going to reshape the world into what he thinks is a utopia because he's from a dystopia and he's learned his lesson. And I think when he came back and has a very Jesus look about him, I was so amused by that and so enamored of just like long-haired, bearded X-Man with the robe open so you can see the X tattoo. Yeah, shredded, and like you can see his tattoo, and I'm just like, he looks like a old hardcore kid who's become like discovered acid and is like living in the desert. Like, it's such a good look for him.
He's got a Jared Leto vibe.
Well, that's a darker place than I wanted to go, but sure, maybe. And I just really I really love it. And then I remembered how we end it with he just banishes everyone. I mean, spoiler, he just banishes everyone and then dies in the ocean.
Yeah.
and
on the
like
shore.
On the shore, and the waves wash and he's gone, and all that's left is the little thing. And I really love that ending. And in hindsight, like, it really made me smile to see him like debating Jean, and like that was a big thing. I remember being like, he's gonna win. Like, he's gonna win in a sense because Jean tries to talk him out of doing this stuff, and then he's just like, no, go away. And he like banishes them. And it's a really, really dark ending for an event like this, and I was always really happy with that. I was in a very dark place in my life, so I was sort of steering things very dark, but I'm really pleased looking at that stuff.
I am curious. I don't want to put you guys on the spot, and we can cut this out if you like, but did you have any reaction to it? Does any of what we're saying make sense with what you read or anything?
Maybe a little.
I mean, yeah, it definitely reads as like those weekly books. How you can kind of get a vibe that they are on that like speedy assembly line. I certainly don't think that this, because I think you guys have been a bit hard on it, and I certainly don't think it's like a victim of that circumstance. I think it holds up, and it has a lot of fun in it for sure. But I could definitely see, yeah, the points that you're making about it. But there are a lot of character beats that I end up really enjoying.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize that it was weekly until we sat down to do it, and then I was flipping through Marvel Unlimited, and I saw the dates, and I was like, holy shit.
Yeah. The funny thing about us being hard on it, and I can't speak for Kelly or Ed here, but like, I'm really hard on everything.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Same.
If I was honest about any book I've written, it would be a very similar podcast, you know.
Yeah, and I really bite my tongue in doing press for a book when I'm doing it, but this is a post-mortem on a book, and I think that's a good chance for us to sort of whatever. I don't think necessarily that these are my experiences at the time or my thoughts at the time. I was pretty in love with doing it. I was pretty in love with, you know, working with these two and working with all these artists and just getting the chance to do it. I mean, it's literally a lifelong dream come true of mine, and like, I owe, you know, Jordan and CB and Joe and everyone at Marvel like that. Like they did that for us, and that for me is everything. But I also spend the next 4 years dissecting things and thinking about things, and hopefully, you know, to me that comes from growing as a writer.
Yeah,
and being
I think
second guessing things.
I
is
think
part
there's
of
a big gulf here. You know, sometimes fans or readers, whatever you want to call them, get sort of prickly about, oh, well, you're being too hard on this thing, or, oh, well, I really liked it, or whatever. But any creator, I think, you're going to excavate things differently because you're trying to figure out how you can do it better, and why did this work and this didn't work, and can I duplicate that or bring that into something else. So I think we're definitely all going to be more hard on ourselves, and there's nothing easier to be hard on yourself about than a big flashy event where your publisher is like, throw everything at it, we want to see it. You're like, okay, you know, so it gets messy in there. And
Absolutely.
I will say on a oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and it's a danger of looking back on things, like, you know, I think a lot about George Lucas and Friedkin going back and revisiting past films and fixing them, and they don't. They make them, you know, infinitely worse. And there's that danger when you're looking back at things. I think sometimes things work at a time and for reasons that you might not be able to understand a little bit later as a creator, as a writer. But they work in their own way, and you just have to sort of move on from it, take what you think you learned from it, and sort of apply that going forward. But yeah, like I think all of us, if you put on a podcast where I talked about any book I've worked on, even books I'm working on currently, I could like just sit here.
What do you hate about the books you're working on right now?
I'm not going to do this. It's not going to be fair to my co-creators, but I could, like if you guys want to do a time capsule podcast where we release in 5 years, I can tell you everything that I wish I'd done differently on books that came out 2 months ago. So, it's a tough one. It's hard. I think, both Matt and Kelly have already said we're going to be our worst critics.
Yeah, I think, I always think about like years ago, I met Brian K. Vaughan and I gave him a copy of my first creator-owned book, We Can Never Go Home. And he was like, how do you feel about it? And I was like, okay. And I was just honest. He's one of my favorite writers. And I was like, I feel okay about it. And he was like, that's good. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, when you're in love with it, you stop trying to improve. Like you stop trying to grow. And I think what Ed said is an encapsulation of that, but also the really good point that it's like, not only do I think I'm a better writer than I was then, so I'm going to look at it from a better writer standpoint, but I'm also a different person than I was 4 years ago. And like, I'm looking at a different person's book and being like, well, how would I do that? And that's always going to be the challenge. And like, I'm glad that I look at this and go, oh, I would tighten this up. I would clean this up, because I think that's important for the growth of the work. But I'm also like happy to see, like, for me personally, like where I was when I made this book is not where I want to be in my life. And I'm in a different place now. And I'm happy to see that, like, I don't love the work that came out of that person wholly. I love parts of it, and parts of it impress me, and parts of it make me sad and stuff. And I think that's a fun experience as a creator. I think like criticizing your work and going back and revisiting it through the toughest lens, I think is really important and really enjoyable. Like, I love beating my old self up.
I would just like to slightly disagree. I don't get great joy out of it, but I do think I learn a lot. Like looking at why something didn't work or didn't work the way I wanted it to.
Well, that's part of the joy, I think.
I guess. I don't know.
I feel like it doesn't feel like joy in the moment, but I feel like when you can take that and then apply it to something you're working on and create, like, fix the thing, that you thought you fucked up on before. I think that's where the joy comes. I don't think necessarily looking back.
Yeah.
Well, don't you guys feel that? I mean, for all of us, we're all writers, and I love it, and I compulsively have to do it. But if you asked me if I'm enjoying it when I'm in the middle of it, like, it's really fucking hard, man. Like, it's there's so many moving parts, and it's so hard to explain to anyone why it's hard. Like, sometimes my dad's like, well, just do it. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Have you ever created anything out of nothing? Where's your book? Like, where's your... Like,
he created you out of nothing.
Yeah, he had help, first of all. Second of all,
I don't know. I wasn't there.
I don't know about the nothing. There were a lot of things involved. But sure, I just... It's a very hard process to describe. And when I'm not doing it, I often wish I was doing it. And yet while you're doing it, you're like, this isn't fun. Like, why do I like this? Why do I feel drawn to do this? Like, I find it a very bizarre experience, because if people ask me what are the things I love most in life, writing is one of them. But man, I'm in hell a lot with it. It's just part of it.
I mean, I think it's, in the same way that I approach my work, that I think, like, you have to have the highs to have the lows, and you have to have the emotional roller coaster. I feel like that in the work. Like, I love making something that I like because I know it was hard to make, and I was up at 5 a.m. cursing under my breath, and then when it's done and I'm like, this is cool, like, that's much more rewarding than if I could just sit down and make something cool and just be like, that's cool. Like, it feels more earned in some ways, the difficulty of it, and I really am sort of in love with that.
Well, before we wrap up, in the spirit of looking back at what you've done before and finding something to appreciate, so I went to look for this joke that I figured was Kelly Thompson, and I it's one of these three, but I have these three moments, and I need everyone to take credit for whose beats these were. All right,
I bet none of us remember.
Through your hazy memory, even if it's not yours, you're going to take credit. So first,
I also have scripts that I can verify.
All right, so you can cheat. So Laura,
for some reason.
So Laura's cutting off Omega Red's tentacles and says, "Dude can't keep attacking with his gross tentacles if we've cut them all off." And then Gabby says, "He's got more. He's got so many tentacles," which is a beat that I really enjoy. Who's going to take credit for that one?
I love that, but I don't think it's mine.
That feels like Kelly to me.
It does feel like me, doesn't it? Wait,
what issue? What issue is that? Kelly can solve it.
It's a good question. I took these screenshots. This is all from the final battle, if that helps.
Oh shit, that is a problem.
But so we'll give that one to Kelly. The second one was Colossus saying, "As we used to say back home, the enemy of my enemy." And Iceman going, "Is that the whole expression?"
That sounds like a bad joke. That's a bad joke.
That's definitely me. That's 100% me.
That's Matt.
There's Matt. All right. And then hopefully we can get an ad with this one.
I feel so embarrassed that I laughed when you read that out loud. And I was like, I wrote that. That's pretty good.
That Gabby joke is Ed.
Oh, damn.
Yep.
All right.
Pages 1 through 10 of issue 10 are Ed Brisson.
I love that. And then finally, Iceman saying, "Does it appear to anyone else that their master disappeared and they seem the same amount of evil?" And then Laura says, "Yes." And then Iceman says, "Sort of makes you wonder why we bother, doesn't it?" And Nightcrawler says, "Ja, a little bit."
I don't know who that is.
I don't know who that is.
If nobody takes credit, I'll take credit for it.
I think that was you, Ethan. I think you wrote that.
I think I was ghostwriting for you back in the day. So final thoughts / plugs. What do you got?
I got some more final thoughts on the book. It's got like, I was flipping through it. This is where I was sort of distracted just now, flipping through it. I think it's got like a lot of really fun moments. I'd forgotten about the moment where during the big fight, it's revealed that the like multiple man, like Jamie Prime, is not actually there. He's just hanging out in a bar, and I thought that was a little fun beat. Like he's just not participating. So yeah, my final thoughts are, it was a lot of fun to write with Matt and Kelly on this. As much as I'm not typically a fan of co-writing with anyone, I enjoyed doing it quite a bit. And yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. I think that Kelly is right. It probably holds together in the first half versus the back, but it is what it is. And as for plugs, I'm writing Deathstroke Incorporated right now over at DC, which is like a year one story for Slade. So, check that out. I've got There's Something Wrong with Patrick Todd coming out over at Aftershock, which is sort of a crime. Involves telepaths as well. A kid who makes criminals rob banks and give them the money so he can pay for his ailing mother in a care home. It's a pretty fun book. And I've got Batman.
Feel good.
It's a real feel good one. It's great. And Batman Incorporated coming up soon from DC as well. I think the FOC on that is September 15th. I want to say so. Pretty soon. So if this podcast comes out before that, please rush to your comics shop or phone your comic shop and tell them that you would love 10 to 20 issues or copies of Batman Incorporated #1.
It comes in packs of 20s.
Yeah. Well, that's if you want to read it more than once, and I think you will want to read it at least 20 times. But and then other than that, you can find me on Twitter if you like yelling at me, and that's just at Ed Brisson. Real simple.
And you have a newsletter, Ed.
I do have a newsletter. You can just go to my website, edbrisson.com, subscribe to my newsletter, where I just talk about, comic stuff I got coming up. I post photos of my cat. And he's at my elbow sleeping right now. And I post photos of my pepper garden, and food that I'm cooking and all that sort of stuff. And some comic stuff from time to time.
A newsletter outside of the Substack pipeline, a true
it's a Substack newsletter. It's a newsletter.
Oh, okay, perfect.
It is
perfect.
a Substack. But you just the easiest way is to go to my website. Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
Wonderful.
Kelly, we just spoke with you, so we know everything going on in the world of Kelly Thompson. But by all means, you have the floor once again.
Sure. I love doing this with Matt and Ed, so that's really my takeaway. I do like the story that we started with, and the story that I feel like under better circumstances, not as rushed, less sort of interference. I like the dream of maybe where we wanted to go, rather than where the directive was taking us. But I still think it's a valid, really fun story. There's a lot of great character stuff in there. There's a few really good jokes, and there's some cool ideas. I want to give Matt a lot of credit. I think a lot of those cool ideas really came from him. I think he was really in the Astonishing X-Men mindset when he came in, and it made a big difference, and it helped us sort of swing for the fences a little bit.
It's very nice of you to say.
Yeah, that's me. I've co-written a few times, and this is the only one that they've all been very different, and they've all been varying levels of success, I think, for me and for the books. But this is the only one I would sort of try to do again with these guys. Like, that's, I don't know. You can find me on Substack, 1979 semifinalist.substack. I've got one book going there right now called Black Cloak. I've got The Cull starting, I don't know, a couple months maybe, I hope. And then we've got a third unannounced book. I'm also still doing Captain Marvel. We're headed into an exciting new arc this fall that's going to have some X-Men in it. And it's Jeff is back starting next week, the week of the 12th, maybe, I think, something like that. And that's on Marvel Unlimited.
Brilliant.
Awesome. I guess I have to go. Do I have to go?
You do.
I'm Matt Rosenberg. You can find me at ashcanpress.com. Sign up for the newsletter and get early episodes of this here podcast. And I said podcast weird, didn't I?
Yeah, that's fine.
You kind of trailed off in general. It seems like you lost confidence in the whole idea of the show.
I mean, the whole thing is definitely a house of cards at this point.
That is a wrap for us on part 2 of our retrospective on Uncanny X-Men with Kelly Thompson and Ed Brisson. As they said in the show, make sure you check out 1979 semifinalist.substack.com and edbrisson.substack.com to check out everything they're working on. To get the latest episodes of this podcast, as well as news, giveaways, and even comics delivered straight to your inbox, go to ashcanpress.com and sign up for the newsletter. We'll be back next week with another wonderful guest, and in the meantime, you can write to us at ideasdon'tbleedpod@gmail.com or tweet to Matt at ashcanpress on Twitter, me at Tales to Astonish, or Griffin at Griff Sheridan. We'll include some of your correspondence on the show, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Big thanks to Summer People for our theme song, Where's the Poison? Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Where is